Setbacks are temporary, but comebacks, they are legendary. Welcome back to the PSI Effect, where we pause, shift, and ignite purpose that speaks louder than your past. This is Neug, and together with Franky, we're your hosts in this space, and your comeback starts now. Welcome back to the PSI Effect podcast, everybody. We are so glad that you are here with us. All of our seasoned listeners and anybody out there who is new to the space, we really appreciate you being here. And again, we've cooked up something interesting, I think, for all of you today. So it should be a good conversation. And as always, I am in this space with my great partner, Mr. Franky.
What's up?
Who generally enlightens us with a few good tidbits before we get started. So Franky, what's going on?
Man, it's kicking off to be a pretty good week. You know, we're recording on a Monday, and typically you're like, oh, it's Monday. It's the doldrums of the Monday. But today was actually a pretty good day. You know, I got up and did my push-ups like, you and I always do. Went for a run, so ran a 5K this morning before I went to work. Got into work, hit the ground running, was feeling nice and productive because I had that activity to kick off the day. And then, my sons are on spring break right now. So my wife and my sons surprised me by dropping in to see me for lunch today. So they picked up lunch. Yeah, they picked up lunch from this place, local place called Merritt's Grill. And they are famous for their BLTs and anything bacon. And we were sitting there eating, and my youngest son said, Merritt's makes Mondays better. And I was like, we need to talk to Merritt so that we can license that for some advertising, because that sounds like a T-shirt to me.
I was just going to say that sounds like a T-shirt. Merritt makes Mondays better.
Yeah, Merritt's, as he took a giant bite out of his bacon-filled sandwich.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you should call them up and y'all work on that. I think that's a good idea.
I mean, hey, look, even if the only compensation is we get free Merritt's for life, we've won.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, before we really jump in, I want to make sure I remind our audience to, while you're in your social spaces, to go ahead and like and subscribe to our podcast so that the algorithms will flow in our favor and other folks can find us, and we can grow this channel and bring interesting conversations to other folks. So just do us a favor and like and subscribe. We really appreciate you being here. And we are going to jump right in. So today we are going to talk about, I don't know, I like to call it pivoting, because we're talking about, how the traditional career is not traditional anymore, or the length of time of the career is no longer what it used to be. So, that old adage about get a degree, stay in your job for 30 years, grab a pension. And now it seems like that philosophy is definitely no longer true. It's more of a fairy tale anymore, considering where we are today. What do you think, Franky?
Absolutely. It is odd when you see nowadays, at least. It feels odd when you see somebody who's been at a company for double-digit years. That tends to be uncommon now. I know I've mentioned before on the podcast in my previous role at the robotics company, I was there for 18 years. Enjoyed what I did, but that was uncommon for people to stay in a role that long. I had people that I hired and were there for 1, 2, 3 years, and then they were ready to move on to something else. So there definitely is a shift in that mindset about longevity. And I don't necessarily know if the word loyalty to a company is the right word, but I think if we're going to use the word loyalty, I think the shift of loyalty has shifted from an employee being loyal to a company to an employee being loyal to their own objectives.
Absolutely. I think folks are still working multiple positions in their current roles. If they are at a traditional institution of work. And I think that with everything that's been happening over the last few years, folks are transitioning. Really, I guess since COVID, when you really think about it, people are transitioning to the home workspace. And like you said, I think that their loyalties have shifted to themselves, their own families, and those things that are important to them. Um, and so, they gotta look out for themselves because the landscape of the traditional workspace has changed over these years.
Yeah, you got to think about it. It's that old adage, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time, right? When somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And time again, some organizations have shown us who they are, where an employee is a number on the balance sheet. And when it comes time for the company to choose itself or the employee, it's always going to choose itself. And the employee is going to be an expendable asset. Realizing that their loyalties not being reciprocated, I can't blame employees for investing more in themselves and their own outcomes in this landscape. Also, too, just looking at the roles that are available now, there are a ton of roles that are just not permanent roles. There are special projects roles or things that a company may be trying out. So a company may try out a position for a year or two and it's just transient. It's one of those things that'll be around for a little while, but it's not going to lead to a long-term career in the organization. So people are betting on themselves now.
Yeah, and just the rules of the game have changed, and I know that companies have downsized since COVID. Folks started working from home out of necessity because of the pandemic, and companies, shifted their philosophies and their strategies as well. So, some folks just got caught up in some of the changes just by default, um,
Mm.
because of what the world was going through. And so, I guess the thing to think about is um, if you feel like your job doesn't fit you anymore, or if that situation doesn't work anymore, don't think of it as a crisis. Think of it as a strategy to move you from one space to another, right? Move you from one position to another, and maybe that position is something totally different than what you ever dreamed that you would be doing.
Yeah, and I would go as far to say that this phenomenon of this kind of changing and from having this singular long linear path in your career to this notion of amassing a portfolio of things that you do, this phenomenon started or actually predates COVID. Because you think about it, most organizations nowadays don't offer like a full retirement package. They don't offer a pension. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a few state and federal jobs that still do that, but even some of those have started moving away from the notion of having a pension. They've grandfathered their seasoned employees in, but for new people coming in, they're no longer eligible for those pension plans. You get a 401k and with some matching at best, but companies started moving that needle well before the pandemic.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. And now, what some of the studies are showing is that um, in 2025, they said that 85% of employees officially adopted skills based employers, I should say, adopted skill based hiring. So, that old adage of, getting a 4-year degree, or even beyond, companies are starting not to look at that as heavily as they used to. They
Mm.
are investing more in the skills side of what, folks bring to the table, more so than what the degrees bring.
Hmm. So, are you suggesting that a degree is not as valuable as it used to be?
I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is that I think companies are looking more at what you do, rather than saying, I manage teams. Well, how do you manage those teams, right? How's your resilience in time of difficulty? How is your skill set for um, getting workers to uh, help accomplish the task, but more so, those kind of, I guess, maybe call them soft skills versus the technical degree based skills.
Yeah, and I want to be,
And,
I want us to be clear here. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
and I was going to say, and I think that, maybe that has a lot to do with in this day and age, the advent of the artificial intelligence era, because there's a lot of things that AI can do or that AI is doing, um, from a
Like a like a task completion perspective.
so artificial intelligence is task oriented, and they can shuffle through databases, they can shuffle through documents, they can sort and all kinds of things of that nature. And so, where that may have been a higher priority for employers just because of the knowledge that some individuals may had, to sort through some of those documents or what have you. Now artificial intelligence can do that. And so now the soft skills are um, you know, important because AI right now doesn't have the personal judgment. They don't have the personal resilience. They don't have the emotional intelligence that individuals possess.
Soft skills. AI doesn't have one of the most important soft skills when you're dealing with people, which is empathy.
Mhm.
Um, but while I agree that this notion of skills based hiring could be influenced by AI, I definitely think it predates AI. We've seen this, in the technology sector, we've seen this for years where companies hire based off of what you can actually do, your skills, your certifications. It's
Mm.
great to have a degree. But they went to a certification model some time ago, and then you saw all these people flocking to get these certifications, and then that caused a shift, and things had to change a little bit from the certification process. But I want to make sure that we are clear here. Um, Education is paramount, no matter what type of education it is. It is the key that unlocks so many doors for us. So while there may be some skills based hiring that's going on, having a degree is always going to put you in a better position than not having one. Going through the motions, whether it's a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, a 9-month certification course, while you're learning things, sure, the things you learn may be outdated soon, especially if you're dealing with things in a technology space. But what matriculating through that curriculum helps you to learn how to learn and adapt so that you can get those things done. And I think those are essential skills that you gain from the degree. And when you think about from an employer's perspective, what is a degree when you're looking at a prospective employee? A degree is something that says this person should be able to do these things because they got this level of education. So that's what a
Yeah,
degree
no
tells
doubt.
us, right?
No doubt.
And
Um,
then the skills, let me tie it off with this. The skill side of it, demonstrated skills show what somebody can do. So those are the two things that employers are looking at. What does this degree say they should be able to do versus what demonstrated skills show they can do?
yeah, and I guess, it's about, listening. It's about having an employer understand the list of problems that you can solve, versus, I have a degree in this, that, and the other. That's great. But
Mm,
what problems can you solve for us in this market, in this market time? Like what does that mean? Right. Um, I think that employers are um less apt to look at titles
mhm.
and more apt to look at, you know, um skills and problem resolutions and so forth like that.
Whew.
Um,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't take anything away from a college degree, absolutely, because the other part of that, and you alluded to it, it teaches you how to learn, but I think it also helps you if you need to pivot in
Mm.
your either in your current role or pivot to something entirely different or pivot your way out of the organization that you're working in right now to do something different to um go a different way in your career.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the notion of employers asking, "What problems can you solve for us?" That's a trick question, quite honestly, right? Because many times, especially if somebody asks you that in an interview, like, "Well, I don't know all the things that are going on in this space." And a lot of times, organizations haven't done the internal reflection and continuous improvement activity to be able to identify what the problems really are. So, from a hiring perspective, how is an employer supposed to be able to judge what problems you can solve for them?
Well, and I guess it's going to come down to some degree of work experience, and
Mm,
the employer is going to have to take a look at that and see if that's something that they feel comfortable with their work experience. But I think that there is a balance, and with the way that people are working and managing multiple positions or multiple roles. I think the other part of this, when we talk about working multiple roles or having multiple roles, is just the um, just the state of the economy nowadays. People in some roles in companies can't really survive on the salary that they make. Right. And so I think that forces them to take on other responsibilities, and perhaps those responsibilities are inside of their organization and then something outside of the organization in order to help them make ends meet. Um, you know, and I guess that's part of that has happened through the test of time. The multiple roles. Because I remember when I was working, you're there was all kinds of things that you were doing in the
mhm.
course of a day. Some of it planned and some of it unplanned. But I think that has a lot to do with the landscape too, and how people are pivoting to make sure that they can make ends meet at home. And like I said, it may be at the institutional role, it may be a combination of things. Um, a lot of people seem to be moving toward entrepreneurship now and having, multiple customers versus working one position in an institution.
The side hustle economy is what we're describing. Keeping that
Mhm.
side hustle. Um, I'm curious though. It's how and I can understand the draw of being able to have more than one source of income. More than one steady flow of income. But how do we avoid the trappings of just working all the time? If we're working multiple jobs.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that's going to be up to the individual to decide based on their current state, their current situation, their financial situation, family situation, what have you, their financial obligations. Um, but I think that's a difficult balance. And, I would imagine that, trying to find the right balance if you're an entrepreneur in your customer mix or the service or product that you're offering to position yourself to make the income that you need to make. Um, it's I don't know that there is a real easy answer to how you grab that balance and not work all the time.
Mm,
And then the other part of it is I think is personality, because some folks are just driven to have, you know, just have that hustle, have that work all the time.
mm.
So it may be just a personal choice to do that. And then of course goals, what goals you have set for yourself, and what it's going to take for you to achieve those goals may require you to work more than, some other folks. So I think there's a combination of things that go into answering that question for each person.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring up the notion of, people having more than one hustle, more than one job, because what we're starting to see now is this proliferation of organizations creating roles that are not designed to be full-time roles. They're like
Uh,
fractional roles. My wife in the medical profession, she works at the hospital, and I was just so perplexed when she was talking about how they divvy up their roles because everybody's wearing multiple hats in the hospital. It's like, all right, well, this person is a zero point 0.5 FTE at the clinical bedside. Then there are zero point 0.3, FTE for this administrative role. And then that remaining zero point 0.2 FTE will be for like, what FTE? Oh, full-time employee. Okay. So you got half of a full-time employee over here and then a third of a full-time employee over here. And you combine all those into one and you've got one person doing all these different things. And man, that made my head spin.
Yeah, that's been around. They call them full-time equivalents, full-time employees. However you phrase it is really just dicing up, um, an 8-hour day and how you dice that up. And it can be confusing. I remember those days. You just took me back for a minute there, Frank. But with that though, if you are say a point 0.5 FTE, so you're a part-time um, person working there, that I guess that frees you up to do other things outside of that organization if it's something that you need to do. Um, and like you said, creating positions, I know employers create positions, and some of them are only designed to work, 2 or 3 days a week.
Mhm. Yeah. And I definitely see how that benefits the organization because that allows them to have more granular budget control. It lowers risk for them if they're trying something new. But I really struggle to see how it benefits people as employees, right? Because you get put in this part-time role and it just seems like it's the deck is stacked in the favor of the organization and not the employee.
Yeah, I think it may look like that, but organizations, they come up with their budget for how many dollars they can spend on payroll, and then they come up with their hours and how those equate. Right, the hours and the dollars have to match, and so it may seem like they don't really care about the employee, but at the same time, they just have to manage the budget. And that's just a hard pill to swallow because I've been on the opposite side of, what I'm saying here. And it's a really hard pill to swallow when you're the one that's in the position that needs the hours, but yet, the hours aren't there. And on the other flip of the coin, if you're a leader in the organization and you have to manage those hours and dollars and you go over budget, I mean, then there's, consequences that come with that. And so it's a it's a it truly is a balancing act. And I guess, for people out there who work under those conditions, what I would say is, understand what your hours are, what hours that you are authorized to work in that environment, and, plan yourself something else to do, really, because if they have you as a point 0.4 FTE, that's probably all you're going to get, from that organization at that time, unless they have overtime or what have you, and that's not promised. So it's a very difficult balance, and in those situations, it helps for people who are depending on the job. It helps people who are retired because maybe they only want to work a certain number of hours a week. So
Sure.
it can help with that. But, the other thing I want to say about the folks who are retired, people who are in their 50s, 60s, um, I think that they are finding opportunities with these skill-based opportunities with organizations because of everything that they do know. They also have a lot of soft skills. When you think about somebody who's worked in a particular industry for, 20, 30 years, they have those soft skills built up. They have them in the bank and they can come and help work through some issues that AI can't work through. There are some opportunities for folks who are, later in years, who may not be ready to just sit down. And there was another stat that I saw that said that 65% of people who are age 55 to 65 are more likely to start a successful company than 20 somethings.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that might have something to do with, like you were talking about, the education. Maybe they have a 4-year degree, and then they have all of this work experience, and so
Mhm.
they have knowledge. You certainly can't discount that any way you slice it.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with the experience of lived life. It definitely accumulates in a way that is very different from what you will learn in a classroom. So yeah, just having that experience at that age definitely makes those folks more marketable, more likely to have been in a situation before and be able to navigate it more gracefully. But leaning back to what you were talking about with balance, that there's I see what you're talking about with the freedom of being able to have multiple income streams, to be able to have maybe a main gig and then a couple of side hustles and things like that. But that also means you potentially have multiple bosses. And just call me old fashioned, but the notion of having more than one boss is just does not sound like a pleasant thing to me.
Yeah, I know that there could be situations where that could be the case. Um, but side hustles could mean you're your own boss, and that's a beautiful thing if you can manage that, and work on your own terms, on your own hours, and generate the income that you need to generate for whatever time that you need to spend. So it's not all, more than one boss situation. Some entrepreneurs or some side hustles are one person, one man, one woman shows, right? So I guess the opportunity has to be right for you. However you decide to do it. Um, but I agree with you. I've been there too, where I've had two bosses, and it's not the easiest thing.
Ooh, sir. No,
It's not
sir.
the easiest thing. But in that boss situation, as we talk about the one job, the one career where you stay in a position for 30 years or what have you, you have that one boss that controls your whole career, right? They can just say, Frankie, nice having you around, but today's your last day, you know? And
Mhm.
I've seen that happen. People were like this close to retirement and, get let go. And that's talk about having to pivot.
Yeah, yeah. So
So,
I think we've done a good job describing this notion of the portfolio lifestyle where we're having multiple threads in our careers, not this linear straight line anymore. What are some of the things that we can talk about with our audience here to kind of get them ignited along the path if they're finding themselves in these situations?
well, um, I think with the living in the era of artificial intelligence, and you were talking about education, and you were talking about certificates. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for folks to gain certificates in the artificial intelligence space. And I think that there are companies, because artificial intelligence is so new, believe it or not, as fast as it's moving, it's still in its infancy. Um, I think that industry is ripe for certificate type training, um, skills based, if you will,
Mhm.
to folks to reinvent themselves and go out and into the marketplace and do some things from an AI perspective. And I think that, you know, I think there's many industries that are hungry for what artificial intelligence offers that I don't think that you have to know 100% of the job. I think that if you know better than 50%, 60% of the job, I think you can learn it as you go, because there are companies that are hungry to understand this whole idea of what artificial intelligence is.
But does that 60% rule apply universally? I mean, there's a lot of jobs that aren't necessarily being directly influenced by artificial intelligence at this point. That is a very niche new sector, but there's still a large swath of employment opportunities that aren't in that vein. Does that 60% rule still apply? Like if you know you've got 60% of what the job is asking for, go for it and see what happens.
I think it's a good place to start. You can certainly test the waters, um, because especially if you're in a pivot situation, what do you have to lose,
Mm.
right? You really have nothing to lose. So I think that it's a good place to start. And you talk about artificial intelligence being a very niche based industry. I would argue that point because artificial intelligence is everywhere. I mean, artificial intelligence is in places where you wouldn't even think.
Mm.
It's literally touching just about everything that you can think of. Now, there are some businesses who haven't, allowed artificial intelligence to cross their threshold yet, but it's only a matter of time because I heard someone say it's not a matter of if artificial intelligence hits the doorstep, it's a matter of when.
I hear you.
So, yeah, I think the 60% rule would apply, even if it's not an AI situation. Just go for it. If you're in a pivot situation, um, you know, uh, what's the other adage? Done is better than perfect.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
you may
Yeah.
have even said that at one of our podcasts, but done is better than perfect.
Yeah. I mean, and I think too, one of the things you touched on in talking about AI is the speed at which things are moving. And I think another takeaway for our listeners is, we need a plan. If we're going to move, we should have a plan. But this colloquial notion of the 5-year plan is a little dated nowadays because with the speed at which technology is moving, the speed at which policies change, with things in the markets change, 5 years is too long of a lead up to do something. So we have to shorten that window. We want to go ahead and shorten it down to 12 to 24 months if we can. And that ties back into things that we've talked about before on the podcast, where we want to kind of break the tasks down into smaller components and, build that
Mhm.
backlog out. So if we can truncate our window down from planning out 5 years to to make sure we have a really clear plan for the next 12 to 24 months, I think that puts us in a better position because it allows us to react to change more readily. Because if we wait a full 5 years, the amount of change that's going to have taken place over that 5 years, we're just going to be starting back at square one at the end of the 5 years. Whereas if we have that shorter interval, 12 to 24 months, it gives us more opportunities to respond to change and pivot our approach appropriately.
And I think you're right about that. And I would also add to that with the way things are moving, these industries are changing so rapidly. You come up with your 12 or 24-month plan, and then it's all about execution, right? You got to execute that plan. You can't wait for the right time. There is no right. The right time is now, right? The right time is right now. And so, yeah, go ahead and develop your plan, design your plan, but then execute. Get out there and make it happen.
Yeah, it is not for the weary in terms of waiting for all conditions to be perfect and for the planets to align. What we're talking about is being prepared, but at the same time being willing to take some risk to go after the things that we want to go after.
And take a look at the we talked about side hustles. Take a look at the side hustle businesses. There's all kinds of things out there. I mean, entrepreneurship has been around forever. People are just really starting to grab hold of what entrepreneurship is, I think, in the last few years because it seems like it's a boom.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's a lot of opportunity out there, I think, if you have the right um if you have the right widget, or if you have the right idea, or if you have the right service or what have you. There's a lot of opportunity. So you're going to have to be vulnerable to a point.
Hmm.
Like you said, take that risk, but it could be very rewarding if everything pans out for you. And I guess the risk part is maybe it won't. But
Right.
think of all the entrepreneurs who tried and tried and tried and tried before they found that one widget that made the most sense for folks to purchase.
Yeah. So in that vein, Nuge, let's make it real for the audience. Nuge, tell us about some of your side hustle adventures. Like it doesn't have to be things that are going on right now, but things that you've across your career, kind of side hustle combinations in addition to your regular work. What are some of the things that have shown up on your career path?
Man, back in the day, I was all in the MLMs, the multi-level marketings. Man, I was all in them, and the household goods, the vitamins, the drinks, I mean, you name it. The ones where you save money on your electricity. I mean, there were all kinds of them out there, and I was jumping in, right? Until I learned how MLMs actually work and who actually makes the money in MLMs. But yeah, I mean, I back in the day, man, it was nothing for me to jump in and see what was going on with it, and because some of them were kind of young, multi-level marketing companies and so forth. And so you figure you get in on the ground floor and, maybe it's a little bit better for you. But, for me, it was not, it didn't work out for me. So when I talk about, being vulnerable and taking a risk, I took a lot of risks
Mm.
with, a lot of those companies. So, um, but yeah, and the other thing that I would say too, Frankie, about the side hustle is I think gone is the old adage that you have to do it by yourself. Because I think side hustles could have multiple people working toward the same goal. Like you may be good at one aspect of the side hustle, but maybe your brother or your sister, your spouse, or whoever, or someone you don't even know, may be good at another part of the side hustle, and maybe you guys can, put your heads together and make something happen. So um, which the multi-level marketing was kind of that theory, like you were working together, but you really weren't. It's like you were really working
No.
together, wink, wink. But
Mm-mm.
my experience was it just wasn't that way.
Mm, man, multi-level marketing. Now, I'm gonna go out on a limb here. Would you also call that a pyramid?
Personally, would definitely call it that. There are
Uh,
those, as you said in one of our previous episodes, that would want to poke holes in my thought on that. However, my experience, I believe that that's exactly what they were. And maybe,
mm,
I haven't been in them a long time. Maybe they've come a long way. Maybe, maybe there's some differences. I don't know. But then at that time, I definitely believe it.
mm, 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 mm.
Yep.
Well, let's start to bring it all back in for our listeners and kind of put a ribbon on this. We want to kind of bring it back to our PSI framework as we're talking about this shift from the traditional linear career to this multi-threaded, multifaceted notion of a portfolio style career. So, we pause to kind of take inventory of the skills that we're bringing to the table. What have we done? What experience do we have? What problems have we solved? And really find the value in those things that we've been able to accomplish. And the shift happens when we recognize that value and we start to really try to embrace this sort of portfolio driven approach to shaping our careers, where it could be we just do one job, or we could have a job and some side hustles, but we're really trying to leverage those skills. And I think the ultimate outcome is that we're trying to leverage those skills to seek fulfillment, not just a paycheck. And then the ignition happens when, we take the leap. Like you mentioned, dude, we've got that, if we feel like we could do 60% of the role, go for it. Give it a shot. If you get your foot in the door, do your best and learn what you can as you go. And don't tell yourself no. Let them tell you no if they don't want to hire you. Don't eliminate yourself by not even trying.
Absolutely. One of the sayings that I carried with me through many years of my career is, you know, give them an opportunity to say no. And that's
Yeah.
in any situation. That's with an employer. That's with an employee. If you want an employee to work overtime and, folks will say, "Oh, well, they'll never work overtime." I said, "Give them an opportunity to say no, because you just never know what's happening at that point in time."
Right.
So give them an opportunity to say no. And the other thing that I would say, Frankie, is that, I talked about taking action, and I know how difficult it is to take action when things are not going well, and you're really frustrated and things are seem to be working against you. And I've been in that situation, more times than I'd like to admit over my lifetime. But I just want to encourage our audience to take the first step, right? Midlife crisis, that to me is a non-statement. I mean, there is no crisis. It's only a crisis if you make it a crisis. Um, I think life happens, situations change, and I wouldn't call those situations crises. Um, do you have to pivot? Maybe. Can you grow from the experience that you had through the situation? Absolutely. It's an opportunity for you to reinvent yourself and go out there and do something different, something that can still be meaningful to you. So don't look at it as a crisis. I remember one of my jobs. I don't think I've talked about this at all through the podcast, but one of my jobs was selling motorcycles at one point in my career.
Hmm.
And I sold Harleys, sold Harley Davidsons. And I just remember that, guys would come in and say, "Well, I'm going through this midlife crisis and I want to buy a motorcycle." I would say, a crisis indicates there's something wrong. There's nothing wrong in your life right now. Your life has changed. Circumstances in your life have changed. Maybe your kids are gone off to college and now you're in a position to where you can do something for yourself and you want to ride a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And I think the same is true if you have to pivot into a different role, um, or if you decide to, go into entrepreneurship or whatever. It's not really crisis. I wouldn't call it crisis driven. Um, Circumstances in life have changed, and so you're changing with the time.
Yeah. Well said. I agree with that.
Appreciate that, sir. Well, um, I don't know, Frankie. I think this was a really good conversation. I feel pretty good about it. Hopefully, our audience has really received what we have laid out for them here, and they can take some of this and find a way, take some action. And if they're in a position where they need to reinvent, if they're stuck and they need to find a way back, if they have had some setbacks and they need some comebacks, they can reach back with some of this information that we talked about and see if they can't uh, make some transitions, make some pivots, and work toward that comeback.
Yeah, 100%. It's all about getting in the game. You can't win the game if you're not in the game. You got to come off the sidelines and try and find that balance. You won't find balance until you know what being unbalanced feels like. So
Mm.
don't shy away from that discomfort. Be willing to be vulnerable, and you will be surprised at how meteoric your rise can be.
Absolutely. Well said, sir. Well, before we sign off here, we always like to let everybody know where they can find us
Mhm.
on all of the places. Frankie, and you do such a great job at that. Will you just tell our folks where they can find us if they want to follow?
Yes, indeed. So for all things PSI Effect, you can find our website. This is psipod.com. There you will find a listing of all of our episodes, as well as all the different platforms where you can get the audio version of the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, just about all the podcast platforms. Find your favorite, like and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you want to see the video, you can see us on YouTube. Just search for the PSI Effect podcast or use our handle at This Is PSI Pod. And then you can also use that same handle on social media. That's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok at This Is PSI Pod. Come on out there and join us. We'd love to hang out with you in the social spaces.
Perfect. 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 All right, everybody. Well, thank you. Follow Frankie's advice and find us. We'd love to hear from you. And as usual, we just want to remind you that setbacks are temporary and comebacks are indeed legendary. And until next time, go out there and be brave and rise on purpose.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.